All right, Shauna, I'm seeing the numbers taper off. I think we can go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am extremely happy and excited to be here today to share with you MSD's Disparity Study Update results. And we have Mason Tillman and Associates joining us this morning, and I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Eleanor Mason Ramsey, Don O'Brien Bannon, and Nicholas Nagaro from Mason Tillman and Associates, who will be delivering our presentation information along with us. And I also have Brian Holscher, MSD's Executive Director and CEO, who will get us started with a welcome from MSD. Brian?
Thank you, Shauna. I asked for a little bit of time on this because I wanted to thank everybody. You're going to see where our past data that we examined compares to the current availability as determined by Mason Tillman. But I want to say thanks for some of the past successes. And the folks I want to say thanks to are Mason Tillman. I want to say thanks to all the construction contractors, all of the consulting engineers, all of the labor providers, the signatories to our community benefits agreement. You essentially covered all of our goals over the past 10 years, whether they were subcontracting goals or labor goals, we met them. And I want to say thanks. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of effort and a lot of trust. It's a lot of people to get there. Shauna and I were really interested to see how these results would come out. And I'm not going to hopefully infringe upon Dr. Ramsey's presentation, but just a few things to look out for. One of the biggest changes you'll see is the change in availability. So on the enterprise side, these are companies. You'll find that the percentage of companies that are diverse have gone up by 25%, both in the construction and the engineering side. This change is caused by two things. One, more diverse companies expressing and willingness and a desire to work for MSD, and also a reduction on the number of non-minority companies who've expressed an interest in working with MSD. It's going to be interesting to see where those go. Also on the labor side, you'll find also an additional 10% increase overall in those goal numbers. So they're going to be different. It doesn't mean we have a disparity everywhere. Some of the past successes actually covered some of the new availability numbers we had. That's just how well the industry's done in helping us get this done over the last 10 years. So I'm going to spill one thing. It's something some of you are going to find interesting, and as I understand, it's probably over half the audience. You will find that we will have, for engineering contracts, sub-consultant goals will finally be coming back, driven by the increase in availability of diverse firms. So take a look, see everything that's here, ask questions. You'll see what's there. We're really looking forward to putting this together and quite honestly, meeting these goals like we did the last time we did the study. So I just want to say thanks to everybody. I'm now, since I'm not a technical person and I hate technology, I'm going to turn this over to Saad to go ahead and carry you forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So just to go over quickly before we dive into the presentation, just some of the meeting technology, just to make sure everyone is aware of how to engage with us. So you are in what's called listen and view mode. And what that means is you can hear us and see us, the presentation team, but we can't hear or see you. The way to engage with us is through the Q&A button. So if you're on a computer or a laptop, if you wiggle your mouse, if you're on a tablet or phone, if you tap on your screen, you'll see a black menu bar appear. One of the options on that menu bar is the Q&A button. If you hit that Q&A button, it opens up a text box, and then throughout the entire presentation, you can type in your questions at any point. We will have a designated Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to ask that question. Everyone can see everyone else's questions. So if you see a question you also want to see answered, you'll see a thumbs up underneath the question. You can hit that and that'll let us know more than one person wants that question answered. Just one ground rule on the questions. If you do have a contractor specific question or a specific question, please feel free to put those in the Q&A, but I'll chat you privately and let you know that I'll pass on your information and your question to the appropriate staff who will follow up sometime after the meeting. So that's it for the technology. I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Shauna.
All right, so it's time to get this party started. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Eleanor Mason Ramsey. Dr. Ramsey is the project manager that headed up this effort for Mason Tillman and Associates, and I will turn it over to you, Dr. Ramsey.
Thank you very much, Shona. Well, good afternoon, all. It is certainly my pleasure to be able to provide this overview of the study findings and to engage with you this afternoon in a discussion of what those recommendations are based on our study findings. We're very pleased to have been able to perform the current study and the previous study, and so our update reflects the changes that have occurred in the award of contracts since January 1, 2013. And please advance the slides. And so for many of you, the study purpose is well known in light of the fact that you have had an opportunity to work with us on this endeavor in times past. But we were to determine if MBEs were underutilized as prime contractors and if the prime contractors were underutilizing the subcontractors, both at a statistically significant level during the period of January 1, 2013 through December 31st, 2017. We studied each of the ethnic groups, which reflects both African American, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, and we looked at Caucasian females and non-minority males. Our study included all prime contracts, those in the building construction, non-building construction, engineering, professional services, purchasing, and other services. And I might note that the building construction, there were only 7 contracts and it was insufficient to be able to do any analysis. So this presentation of the statistical findings will cover non-building construction, but it will not do the vertical construction. And so before talking about the study findings, I'm going to ask Don if he will discuss the legal underpinnings, because it was the legal standard that guided our discussion and analysis of the contracts awarded during this period, 2013 to 2017. Don?
Yes, next slide, please. The seminal case in this area that really is the benchmark for these types of studies, it really kicked off this disparity study cottage industry, was the Supreme Court's decision in City of Richmond v. Croson. And in that decision, the significance of it is that it changed the standard of review from a rational basis test to a strict scrutiny test. And that strict scrutiny test is the highest standard of review for governmental actions. And that really is the significance of this decision. And it's also the reason why the sanitation district, St. Louis, has to do these types of studies. The reason is a 2-pronged test that was established in City of Richmond. One is compelling interest, and the second is narrowly tailored. Those are the 2 prongs of the test. A compelling interest is essentially a strong basis in evidence. That strong basis in evidence is documented or proven by having a statistically significant disparity between utilization and availability. A significant statistical disparity between utilization and disparity. That is the benchmark before you can use race and conscious measures. Important to note, population is not the standard. It's the population of businesses in that market. It's also important to note that it's not economic development. It is a remedy for discrimination. So it creates a rebuttable inference of discrimination for the governmental entity if there is a statistically significant disparity between utilization and the availability of minority and women-owned businesses in the marketplace. There is another component to this, and I'll mention this now, called anecdotal evidence. And anecdotal evidence is the experience of those who have done business with the governmental entity and their experience in either doing business or attempting to do business with the governmental entity. And anecdotal evidence cannot be the basis for implementing race-conscious measures, but it does bolster the statistical findings of disparity by providing some guidance as to what those barriers may be. Also, it provides insight into perhaps what recommendations may be appropriate in order to address those barriers as you move forward in terms of. It's also important to note that this same standard of review that was applied in Richmond v. Croson to state and local governments was also expanded and applied to the federal government in Adirondack versus Pena. So regardless of what governmental entity is implementing race-conscious measures, they have to comply or meet this strict scrutiny standard. The next prong of the test after compelling interest, if you satisfy that particular prong, is narrowly tailored. Next slide, please. In City of Richmond, the City of Richmond was a 14th Amendment equal protection challenge to the City of Richmond's MBE contracting program. It's important to note that the city had adopted a minority business utilization plan. They had a 30% subcontracting set aside for minority businesses, business enterprises, and the Supreme Court subsequently held, after reviewing the basis of that program by the city, that the City of Richmond's MBE contracting program violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Please note that City of Richmond only addressed the issue of race. And as you can see from the slideshow, it was a minority set-aside program for minority businesses. Gender is decided under a lesser standard called intermediate scrutiny. Intermediate scrutiny is a substantial underutilization of women who attempt to do business with that particular governmental entity. It does not require that it be statistically significant. Next slide, please. So once you have established through your statistics that you have a strong basis in evidence, you have a statistically significant disparity for Hispanics or African Americans, the disparity findings that you will see that flow, that will be presented in this report, are all race and gender specific. They are also industry specific. So you will see results for those industries that have subcontracting opportunities, like construction, by race, by gender, and again, by industry. So the subcontract goals are limited in the future to those groups that have findings of disparities. So if you have Hispanic, Asians, or African Americans who have a statistically significant disparity in construction, then you can have goals, subcontract goals for those groups in construction as part of a narrowly tailored remedy to address the inference of discrimination created by that statistically significant disparity. The goals are defined by availability of the ethnicity and gender groups with disparity in each industry. It's important to note that there was an analysis that was done by Mason Tillman in which they first determined what the utilization was. Once they had determined what the utilization was, they next then determined the geographic market or the market area. That market area is then used to determine the availability of minority and women-owned businesses within the market area for each of those industries: architects and engineering, other services, construction, goods and services. So that is the construct by which all of this is done. Next slide. I now turn the discussion back over to Dr. Ramsey to discuss methodology.
Thank you, Don. The next slide, please. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is describe to you the method that we use to perform this analysis. And there are 3 prongs to a disparity study as defined by the Supreme Court when they issued the Croson decision on the 23rd of January, 1989. And that's utilization, availability, and anecdotal. And Don has addressed each of those and their role in the statistical analysis. So we were charged and did, in fact, examine formal and informal contracts to prime contracts and the subcontracts awarded by the construction contractors and the professional service contractors. And for each of the groups, we identified businesses in the St. Louis city and county market area that were willing and able to perform MSD's contracts. And in addition to doing the analysis of the statistics, which compared the use to availability, we also examined the anecdotal accounts and perceptions of those businesses within the marketplace. And those perceptions are critical in formulating recommendations and understanding the statistical findings. The court's very clear in saying that you cannot use anecdotal accounts of discrimination in lieu of a finding of statistically significant discrimination, but you can use it to inform the analysis. And so that we did. And to turn your attention now to the study findings, we'll go to the next slide. What I want to do first is to present to you the prime contract size distribution. And what is very important in looking at the size distribution is to take note of the fact that only 20% of the contracts exceeded $100,000. So there were essentially quite a few smaller contracts in the analysis of the contracts that were awarded, as well as quite a few smaller businesses, because most businesses in the United States have fewer than 20 employees, and so it corresponds with that. So I'd like to next discuss the highly used non-building construction prime contractors. If we advance to the next slide, please. And as I noted, the building construction, vertical construction, there were simply 7 contracts, 5 vendors used, and so really it was not information sufficient to perform a statistical analysis. So that presentation would not be informative. However, on the non-building, the horizontal construction, you had 890 prime contracts, and there were 102 companies that received 1 or more contracts. And what we want to do here is to give you an appreciation for how the awards get clustered. And so we had 5 contracts, 5 contractors, or 5 businesses that received almost 70% of the contracts. And the balance of those contracts were awarded to 97 businesses. So there's a high concentration of contracts to a few of those businesses. And that pattern, when we look at highly used, the next slide on engineering and professional service contracts, you will see again a pattern of concentration of the majority of the contract awards to a few contractors. And so here we see that we had 55 utilized vendors, and 5 of those vendors received 70% of the contract dollars that were awarded for professional service prime contracts. And when we go to highly used purchases and other service contracts, we see a similar pattern of highly used vendors that are receiving the majority of the dollars awarded, not necessarily majority of the contracts, but of the dollars that were awarded. And as a consequence of this pattern, if we look at our next slide, you're able to see for this period that we studied the total dollars that were awarded during this period and the dollars expected for non-minority male contractors. And those dollars represented roughly 50% of the dollars that they were expected to receive based on their availability. They're being in the marketplace, willing and able to do contracts for MSD. And of those total dollars awarded, the 50% that the non-minority males receive, the total dollars that we look at that were expected for MWBEs was 49%. And the total dollars awarded to MBEs represented 25%. So MBEs effectively lost 26% of the dollars that were awarded, that based on the Croson theory that minority businesses all businesses should receive contracts based on their availability in the market area. That is their willingness and ability to perform the client's contracts. So minorities lost dollars because they were not utilized at the level that they were available in the marketplace. And what you also see is how those dollars, the lost dollars, are distributed, and that the expected dollars is based on the availability of the group. And you can see here the expected dollars for each of the ethnic groups. And in turn, you see the dollars that each of those groups lost as a consequence of not being utilized at the level they were available in the marketplace. And we think that that informs this process. If we look at the next slide, you can see the dollars lost by industry. And so here for each of the industries, we show you the dollars that each of the groups lost as a function of their not being awarded contracts at the level equal to their percent of their availability in the marketplace. And that is not all groups lost dollars, as you can see in some of these groupings, that there are some groups that are not reflected because there were no dollars lost by those groups. But where the dollars were lost, and the first grouping is where all of the ethnic groups lost dollars. And the last group, purchases and other goods, services, African Americans and Asian Americans did not lose any dollars, which effectively means they were either at parity or they received more dollars than they were reflected in the available pool. So to the next slide. Now that we have examined and discussed the fact that we have these dollars lost, question is, does the loss of dollars by ethnic group reflect a statistically significant underutilization? Excuse me. And as you note on the red, the last column is what's known in the statistical world as the p-value, but effectively what it says is it denotes whether that group has a statistically significant disparity. So, and by the definition of the court, a statistically significant disparity means that there has been discrimination in the decisions to award and the process of awarding contracts. So we see here for informal, non-building construction under 25,000, where advertising is not required, you have a statistically significant disparity for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Caucasian females. So let's look then at the formal non-building construction. And in this instance, there's a cap that was applied to ensure that the outliers, the very large contracts, were not included in the analysis. And in this instance, once that analysis was applied to contracts that required advertisement, we had African Americans and Caucasian females had a statistically significant disparity. And effectively, minority businesses and women businesses had a disparity. And the minority businesses reflect all minority groups, male and female. And the women business finding in this instance reflects all women. So women of color are reflected in both the minority business calculation and the women business calculation. So let's look at the informal engineering professional services contracts under 25,000. And again, where advertising is not required. And here you see that all of the ethnic groups had a disparity except African Americans. African Americans' use for informal contracts exceeded their availability. And so there is no disparity finding in that regard. And there is also no disparity finding when you aggregate the groups with minority businesses or women-owned businesses. So to the next slide, please. So formal engineering professional service contracts, where we capped it again to ensure that any program applied would not, any of the analysis did not include outliers. We had an outcome of statistical findings for two groups. We had Asian Americans and Caucasian females for formal engineering prime contracts had a disparity. But when the numbers were aggregated, minority businesses and women business enterprises both had statistically significant disparity, which is actionable based on the Croson decision. So to the informal purchases and other services, which included goods and other materials, we see a similar pattern that on the informal contracts, all of the groups had a disparity with the exception of Caucasian females. So to the next slide. And on the formal purchases of other goods and services, again, ranging from 25,000 to 500,000, you had overutilization in the case of African Americans and Asian Americans. But the underutilization or the absence of utilization could not be tested for the Hispanic and Native Americans. So consequently, minority businesses were not significant. Women business enterprises are significantly underutilized in formal contracts. So to the next slide, please. So in effect, for formal prime contract disparity findings, we are reflecting here those groups in those industries where there was a disparity. And where there's a disparity, it's actionable data that can be considered by MSD in its programming. So to the subcontracting, you see a pattern that's similar. And let's move to the next slide. So in the subcontracting, each of the groups are showing a statistically significant underutilization at the subcontracting level. With in the non-building, in the building construction, we were able to analyze subcontracts because there were more data, even though few prime contracts. And so you see here in the building construction, all groups except Native Americans had a disparity. In the non-building, African Americans and Native Americans and did not have a disparity. Consequently, minority businesses did not either. And as noted, in engineering and professional services, the data was available to do an analysis of subcontracts. And so we found a finding of statistically significant underutilization of African Americans, Native Americans, and of minority businesses. I might note with women, as Dawn has indicated, the standard that's applied to women business analysis of disparity is different because the court did not opine on women business program. The City of Richmond's program, which was challenged, was a minority business program. So women need only be underutilized. They do not have to be underutilized at a statistically significant level. So to the next slide, please. So based on our statistical findings, the next slide, we have made some recommendations that we feel should be considered by MSD as it moves forward to have its program enhanced and made equally rigorous. It's done, I think, some very successful implementation of program elements over these last years, but we're making some suggestions as they move forward and suggesting that applying a prime incentive credits for engineering professional services and non-engineering professional services, and to implement a sheltered market program. And a sheltered market program allows the agency to limit competition on certain size contracts to selected group of businesses that would be classified and certified as small and minority businesses, so that the competition for smaller contracts would be limited to businesses of comparable size. And also, we believe that you can increase the capacity of your minority business and small business community by having a mentor protege program, which would recognize those prime contractors that enter into relationships with minority women or small businesses to mentor them to increase capacity and ability to compete on more contracts at both the prime and sub level. So those are the remedies for the prime contracts. We also have made recommendations for remedies for subcontracting. And we have recommended that subcontracting goals be set for ethnic and gender groups with a statistically significant disparity. And as reflected in our presentation, there are particular levels of availability evident in the community as we identified businesses willing and able. And we think that are recommending that goals be set on prime contracts in order to ensure the fulfillment of the commitment to use minority and women businesses at the level that they are available in the marketplace. And then we are suggesting there's some revisions to the MWB participation requirements for truckers, another part of the construction industry that could benefit from an enhanced attention to how those provisions are implemented. We also have made some race and gender neutral recommendations. Here we are suggesting that the electronic tracking system be modified so it captures both the minority and women business enterprises that are used by a prime contractor and the non-minority and women business enterprises. So there's a complete picture of all subcontractors, which will make the analysis of the level of participation of MWBEs at any point in time visible by simply doing a comparison of the use to the availability. And we also are recommending that MSD require all prime contractors to list all of the MWBEs and non-MWBE subcontractors in all bids and proposals, so that the MSD will be made aware of the businesses that should be participating and can more effectively monitor the level of participation that is actually achieved during the life of the contract. So that represents our findings for the analysis of your construction, professional service, goods and services contracts. And we did also, as noted, a analysis of the workforce. We recommended in the last study some goals for workforce. And I'm going to ask Nicholas Nagora to present to you the workforce findings and give you an appreciation for what was found in that analysis and what is being recommended as you go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mason Tillman also did an analysis of MSD's workforce. These are the employees from businesses that worked on MSD contracts. Next slide, please. So the way we started collecting this data is MSD collected the workforce reports in their diversity reporting system online. We compiled all of that data and combined it into 3 categories. The 3 categories we used are the construction trades, construction apprentice, and professional services. So as you can see from this slide, we summed up all of the hours worked by the different employees within construction trades, which equated to 2,544,107 hours. You can see the breakdown of the percent of hours. We then pulled availability data based off of NAICS codes from the Census website within the market area. And that's how we determined what the availability for the different ethnic gender groups are for within these industries. As you can see what the previous goals that were recommended in 2012 were, based off of the new availability from the 2019 census data, the goals have gone up a bit. The goals were very close to being met in the old, based on the old goals, but as the availability in the area increases, the goals then have to be adjusted as well. Next slide, please. So the next slide, we're talking about the construction apprentice data. So there was the number of apprentice workers were lower, so there's less hours worked here. But as you can see from here, again, the hours worked versus the availability, which leads to adjusted 2022 goals as well. So construction construction reports were done monthly. So we have a lot of construction hours in our analysis for this. Next slide, please. On the professional service side, professional service reports are done quarterly. So we have compiled those numbers as well. Again, we've looked at the percent of hours for each of the ethnic groups versus the availability from the census data. So we have, again, a situation where the goals were very close to being met in 2012, and then based off of increased availability in 2022 from the market area, we have an increase in the goals as well. Next slide.
Okay, this is Shauna Paredes again with MSD. We have completed the delivery of our findings by Mason Tillman Associates. And so the purpose of today was to distribute our disparity study findings information. And as you all have heard in the last hour or so, that we still have some important work to do with regards to our diversity programs based on what the findings are. So basically, I want to share with you what our next steps are. The actual presentation, I saw that question in our Q&A earlier. The presentation is being recorded today, and it will be uploaded to the diversity website. The website location is what you see here, www.projectclear.org/disparity. That is the site that will host all of the information, including the presentation that you saw today, as well as the actual disparity study booklets with the actual results of our disparity study. All of that information will be contained on that website. In addition to that, I want everyone to know that moving forward, we will have everyone to participate with and have the opportunity to weigh in on our findings as we move forward. We plan to conduct outreach activities. We will be collecting public information and sharing that across on the website. So basically, moving forward, we will be working with our community stakeholders, and we'll be out there collecting information and getting valuable input from all of the stakeholders as we move forward with setting up our programs, to address the findings. So what we'll be doing is collecting that input, conducting that outreach through April 30th. We'll compile all of that information and data and plan to take that information from the public, from stakeholders to our board, along with the findings in June of this year, at the end of our fiscal year. And then to have the board consider that information that we bring and adopt the results of our study, and along with any recommendations that are brought forth to our board for consideration. All of that we plan to have the board adopt in July, which is at the beginning of our fiscal year FY 2023. After that, we will be putting together an implementation plan should the board decide to accept our disparity study findings. We will be required to put together that implementation plan and work with our stakeholders, work with our community to put our programs in place. And the hopes are that we will be ready to move forward with making changes to our programs by the time we reach our next fiscal year, which will be July 1st, 2023. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work ahead of us. We have had some really, really good successes with the program in the 10 years that I've been at MSD. And I look forward to working with all of our stakeholders as we move forward to implement our changes to our programs as a result of our study. Next slide. And with that, we will now have questions. We'll accept any questions that anyone may have and try our best to respond to those. If we're unable to respond to a particular question, we will be implementing on our website and keeping track of frequently asked questions that may come up throughout this process as we collect public information. So if your question is for some reason not answered today, we certainly will do our best to get that added to our frequently asked questions and provide that in a public way on the website.
All right, thanks, Shauna.
I'll take the questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. So how this is going to work is I'll go ahead and read off the questions that are in our Q&A box, and then I'll pass them off to Shauna. And then if Shauna needs someone else to answer, she'll pass it off to them. As a reminder, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. As a reminder how to do that, if you just wiggle your mouse, tap on your screen, you'll see the Q&A button. You can type in your questions there. All right, so from Alex, slide 32 to 34, do the hours, let me go ahead and go back to that. Do the hours account for all construction projects or just projects that had an MBE minority boots on ground requirements?
I'll defer this to Dr. Ramsey.
Yeah, so for the workforce data, our understanding from the manual we received is that all prime contractors are required to report their employee involvement. So therefore, it would be all of the construction hours from when they started collecting workforce hour data.
May I also add that with regarding to workforce on MSD's construction projects, workforce kicks in at a threshold of $500,000. So on the construction side, the workforce contracts that have workforce hours reported on them were contracts that exceeded $500,000.
Okay, awesome. This next one, when Mason Tillman mentions availability of workers as well as available minority businesses, is that directed specifically to businesses that do MSD sewer work, or is that a general study that was performed?
It is a response. It is a reference to businesses that are willing and able to perform MSD sewer work.
All right, perfect. And we did have one from Ted that Shauna, you already addressed. Did want to make a point. I believe on the PowerPoint it said projectclear.org. It is msdprojectclear.org on there, but you'll see that corrected on the website as well in any follow-up communication.
Correct. I apologize for that.
No worries, no worries. Okay, from Jennifer, what is the definition of an informal contract?
Informal contracts are contracts which do not require public advertisement of the solicitation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ramsey. Are there goals for prime MBEs/WBEs?
Shauna, you might want to talk about what you're planning to do in that regard.
Well, the goals are based, the goals and the recommendations are based on subcontract goals. These are not prime MWBE goals.
Okay, and then one from Steve. How did you determine the available workforce and apprentices?
So workforce data is based off of what people report in the census. People report their job occupations. So we take a look at the census data within the market area, and we look at the available different NAICS or SOC job standard operating job codes to determine who in the area is available to work within the particular industry. In this case, it is not necessarily based on who is willing to work with MSD, as these are employees not of MSD, but of private businesses within the area.
All right, thank you. Might not know this off the top of your head, or maybe you do. How many minority contractors are in the available market area?
That's not a number I have at the top of my head.
Okay. We can follow back up on that. Okay, and then another one from Stephen. Is there an incentive for MWBEs to be prime contractors?
Well, currently, we do have incentives at the proposal level on professional services contracts, whereby prime MBEs and WBEs do receive credit in the evaluation process based off of their category of MWBE, as well if there were any disparities defined there. And in terms of on the construction side, we do not offer that on the construction side at this point in time, but certainly that is something that we will take into consideration as we move forward with the findings that we have here today.
On a part of that, this is Brian Holscher. So part of that's getting addressed. That's why we have some of the growth programs to help people develop into prime contractors, correct? That is one of the responses or one of the programs we have in place that will continue and, as I understand, make it more robust. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Shauna, another one from Kelly. If a prime contractor is an MWB business, do they still need to find subcontractors to meet the requirements?
Well, on the current program, I would say yes. With regards to our disparity study findings, we will, look at what our results are and see how that would be applicable into our program. So I don't have an answer for you on that today, but I'll take that as a question that we'll address.
Right. I am not, oh, there's another one. Couple more from Stephen. Can a prime MWB contractor count self-perform work?
In the analysis that we did, we separated the analysis of the prime contracts from the subcontracts and sought to determine all of the subcontractors that a prime used. And thus, if the prime performed work in the scope that would otherwise be subcontracted, it was still defined as dollars paid for prime contracts. It would not have been defined as dollars paid for subcontracts.
All right, and I think this next one could go for Nicholas. Is the workforce census data from the city of St. Louis or St. Louis County?
So we followed the same market area that we used in our disparity study. So the workforce census or market area is both the city and county of St. Louis.
Hey, saw this Brian Holzer. I saw Steve put a question mark up. Can I just maybe expand on Shauna's answer a little bit if he's got a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so Steve, your question was, right now we don't allow self-performed prime work to count towards MWBE subcontracting participation. And what Shauna was saying, that's something we considered last time, and we did not allow prime participation to count towards that at all. That's something she said we need to continue looking at and getting input from as to whether we'll maintain that practice or if we'll do something different in the future. That's something we still need to look at.
He said thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any more active questions. We'll give it a couple more seconds to see if there are any lingering questions left. Of course, if you couldn't think of a question today, but you do think of one later, please go ahead and reach out to us with that question as well. Okay, and from Kelly, the note I offer is that the current practice disincentivizes WBE / MBE from leading projects.
Since she addressed it to me, it could be taken that way. We do have certain restrictions on incentivizing prime contractors in the construction side of the business. That's one of the reasons we spend so much time trying to help those folks grow. I would say there probably is an incentive if they want to be primes, and we've had some folks who graduated out of those programs. So you have hit on one of the things that we talk about every time we do one of these studies. There are some legal impediments to us providing, as I understand your term, incentives in the open bid construction process, both with state law and our charter. So unlike the consulting engineers where there is an incentive, not necessarily to be a prime, but an incentive given in the scoring process, that scoring process doesn't exist for contractors. So it is something we deal with. Point is noted. I'm sure Shauna will take it with her. And Shauna, with that, I'll try and make sure I stop answering any questions.
All right, Shauna, I'm not seeing any more active questions, so I can go ahead and pass it back over to you to close it out.
Okay, I just like to say, take this opportunity to say that when we released the 2012 study and we, walked away with certain specific endeavors that we had to take on here at MSD. And I knew it would be a challenge, but I can say that with the diversity staff and the support of MSD's management, the engagement with the community, such as those in our community benefits who, asked the hard questions and challenged us, to meet those objectives that were set out in our last disparity study. I just like to say thank you as MSD takes on this new challenge and these new endeavors to, make our contracting efforts truly diverse. And I just like to say thank you to everybody for participating today and attending, and I look forward to working with you all. Thanks.